LawTech Talks, discussing all things technology in Australia's legal profession. Brought to you by Lawyers Weekly.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of LawTech Talks. My name's Jerome Doraisamy. I'm coming to you today from Paralegal land in Sydney. And I'm very pleased to be joined for this conversation by Andrew Wight, who is the founder of adieu.ai and also the founder of AI Paralegal. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jerome.
Today, we are going to be discussing why the age of artificial intelligence means more lawyers, not fewer. This gets right to the heart of one of the headline fears that legal professionals, and not just lawyers, of course, but people right across the market, this gets to one of the headline fears that professionals have when it comes to the advent of new technologies like AI. And we're going to discuss how and why onboarding and utilizing AI doesn't necessarily mean fewer jobs. It actually can and may create more. Andrew, there's a lot to get into here, but before we do, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. So I founded Adieu a decade ago, almost to the day, actually. And when I did that, I had absolutely zero experience in the legal sector. And so I was actually a geek, so I did a computer science degree. I then moved into design, and human-centered design was kind of the what I spent most of my career doing. That's kind of my superpower. And then I actually founded the company, as I said, 10 years ago with my dad, which is not typical in legal tech or in startups generally. Normally if you're starting something with your dad, it's going to be a plumbing business or maybe a law firm even. And so he was an accountant who had a lot of experience with divorce litigation. And he basically saw a big need for a better way of doing things, wrote a book, became a bit of a personal, mission for him. I helped him out a little bit. And then we actually got a Queensland government grant, which enabled me to take a sabbatical for my role at the time, which was leading the user experience team at Sapient Nitro, which is a American design and tech company. And then I never went back. And so here I am 10 years later, sitting with you.
Yeah. And what is it about the legal tech space that is so, uplifting and meaningful for you?
So legal tech is an area in which you can make a big human impact. I think I was always drawn to human-centered design because I find humans interesting. I'm a bit of a sucker for a cause as well. And working on things that are purposeful is just more fun. It's just a better way to spend a life. And so I think I kind of stumbled into it, I suppose. It was really Dad's passion that got me into it. But I very quickly saw that the opportunity to create an impact in people's lives was really large. And that really sucked me in, I suppose.
So tell us about Adieu.
Okay, so the mission came first. The startup came second. And so the mission that we've always had for the last 10 years at least is to enable separating families to reach resolution 10 times sooner. And we actually had another product that we spent probably the first 5 years on. And that was quite effective in terms of actually solving the problem, but it was a commercial failure. And so that was around real-time mediation and dispute resolution and helping people to come to very fast and feasible resolutions. And so we won a bunch of awards on that. We're on the Today Show, we're on National Night News, but that doesn't really help when you're trying to make a sustainable startup. And so basically that failed. And as a last roll of the dice, we tried a much more radical idea, which was AI paralegals, essentially. And I actually got inspired by my robot vacuum cleaner. And so desperation can focus the mind.
Yeah.
And we basically knew we had to make something work in the next couple of months or we were done. And I was really struck with the way that my robot vacuum cleaner that I just bought at the time just cleaned the house. And I didn't really direct it. I just gave it a high-level goal and it did it for me. And so basically the concept was, well, why can't we have an AI paralegal that does a similar thing in family law? And so this was before ChatGPT, by the way. And so I used a technique from the video game industry that they use to control non-player characters. And so essentially AI Paralegal is a non-player character, if you think about it. But instead of controlling a character walking down the street in Grand Theft Auto, or a soccer player in a video game, it's actually controlling a paralegal that does billable work in a law firm. And that was a very radical idea at the time. In fact, we were almost too early. I think had ChatGPT not come along when it did, we may not have made it because the law is not known for its rapid pace of change and accepting things quickly. And that was a very radical idea, especially because the AI paralegal is client-facing as well and can talk to clients. And so, that really, I guess we were at the right time at the right place because we built this, it was working really well, and then kind of the great appetite for AI came along when we were there.
Yeah, and not just was that appetite suddenly there, but it sounds as though, and going back to your anecdote there about the vacuum cleaner, if just stripping it back to basics and understanding what people want and need, both professionals and clients, is probably a really good way to tackle this new tech landscape rather than perhaps trying to be too fancy sometimes.
100%. And I mean, I think that's something I learned the hard way as a startup founder. If you're working on something that's clever or you can show on paper why it's really valuable, it's not enough. If it's not in the top 3 things that the people you're building for care about, if they're not lying awake at night worrying about it, you're probably going to fail.
Yeah.
I learned that the hard way.
Fair enough. And what does 2026 look like for AI Paralegal?
So we were acquired in July last year by Leap. And so really we're looking to scale rapidly. So we spent the last 4-ish years basically building the concept up. And so we have done nearly 3,000 matters. We've done nearly $2.5 million worth of AI paralegal, billable AI paralegal work for our firms in our beta. And so we were looking to shift gears in terms of scale. And so that came at a good time. And so basically this is a scaling strategy for us, not an exit strategy. So I'm not going anywhere. And we actually so Adieu was founded as a social enterprise. And so we were part of a social enterprise startup accelerator called Impact Academy. And there's a particular school, I suppose, of social enterprise, which says charity has its place and there's some problems that require charity, but a lot of the human problems that we have can better be solved by self-sustaining businesses because the business creates the wealth that actually funds itself, so it can grow very rapidly. And also, if it's tech-based, it can scale very quickly as well. And so the sweet spot for a social enterprise, at least in the accelerator that we went through, first prize is that the business that you have actually creates the impact you want to see in the world, and the revenue it generates funds itself. So you can be very ambitious about what you do. And so that's still the case. So the mission hasn't changed. The ambition hasn't changed. However, it's probably got larger, if anything, because Leap, as one of the largest legal tech companies in the world, has a lot of reach, a lot of resources. And so I'm hoping to really push that social impact to a much greater scale, ideally on a global level.
Yeah, awesome. We're chatting with Andrew Wight, and we'll be back with more right after this. So, Andrew, we're here today to talk about why the age of AI could see more lawyers, not fewer. And to start this part of our conversation, I want to ask what's probably a bit of a stupid question, because there may be a very obvious answer to this, but why is this an important conversation for us to be having? I mean, certainly there's a lot of fear around whether AI is going to take people's jobs in law or outside of law. But why do you see this as being important to dive into?
Because it's so counterintuitive. It's almost the exact opposite of what people would expect. In fact, in the beta where we did those numbers I mentioned earlier, most of the things we learned from that are actually the exact opposite of what most people would expect. And so I guess I've been on the bleeding edge of AI for longer than most. As I said, we were working on this prior to ChatGPT coming out. And it's very counterintuitive. These are very surprising things, and they're not obvious. And so I think it's great to talk about this stuff, especially, this is based on what we've observed in our beta, not stuff that I've just read online or reading a book or something, right? So it's firsthand experience. And so I think it's important that people understand this, because otherwise they'll have the wrong posture. I think a very common logical fallacy people have at the moment is, okay, let's try and do the same thing with less people. And that's actually a losing strategy, because what you want to do is, at worst, you want to do more with the same people. At best, you actually want to do more with more people.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because there's certainly been a lot of talk about how AI can remove some of the grunt work, the menial tasks, and allow lawyers to focus more on evolving their service delivery and becoming more like trusted advisors, rather than offering the sort of black and white or black letter legal advice to clients. But from what you're saying, it sounds as though law firms, in-house teams probably need to be thinking bigger than just that kind of pivot. And you need to be, as you said, looking to see how you can do more work with more people, rather than just simply replacing what your existing staff is going to do, or even less staff than that.
Yeah, that's right. I think where people get it wrong is they consider the productivity gain that the technology brings, and they ignore the fact that that gain actually unlocks a larger market. And that's where they go wrong. And so there was actually an English economist who quite famously in 1930, his name was John Maynard Keynes, in 1930, he predicted that due to the current trends in automation and factories and manufacturing, that most people would only work 12 to 15 hours a week within the next 100 years. I don't know about you, but I'm not working 15 hours a week.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure no one else who's working full-time listening is either. And the reason for that is the automations, the productivity that he predicted did come about. But that's not how economics works, right? You just do more if you can do more. And that's actually a good thing if you think about it from the legal point of view, from in terms of the law, right? Because when you have a market that has a large latent demand, what it means is that more people get legal services.
Yeah. No, certainly. So why do you think legal teams might be not ignoring, that's the wrong term, but why might they not be able to see beyond the immediate horizon and understand those longer term benefits of being able to do more with more? And certainly lawyers are not unintelligent people. So did you think, perhaps there's a bit of a fog around, well, we've got to onboard AI, we've got to get it right, got to make sure everyone is using it correctly, and so perhaps they just don't have the bandwidth right now to take that longer term view?
Yeah, I think it's human nature as well. Like it's very easy to imagine how what you do today could be automated. It's quite difficult to imagine how the shape of your job might change in 10 years, or how the size of the market or the shape of the market might change over 10 years. That's very hard to do. And I think it's just not intuitive for most people. And it's got nothing to do with intelligence. It's just human nature. And it's why we make these mistakes over and over again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I guess that's why it's important to have these kinds of conversations, so we can take stock and reflect on how we're going and what might need tinkering with. And I would imagine that this kind of conversation would be applicable outside of law as well. Maybe in accounting or HR or in other sectors, that you can and perhaps should be doing more work with more people, rather than simply looking to replace or even downgrade your workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's particularly true in any area in which there is a latent demand. And so, you ask, I guess the question is there a latent demand for legal services? Or another way of asking that is, does everyone who needs legal services get legal services today?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is pretty obviously no.
Yeah. Well, certainly access to justice remains a huge problem nationally and certainly globally. And that's a whole nother conversation that we could have one day. So I want to ask about how legal teams and certainly leaders in those teams can and should be looking to do more with more lawyers. But before we do, perhaps it's worth diving into some of those takeaways and findings that you had from that beta stage, because that might then inform some of the practical steps that can and should be taken.
That's right. And so in our beta, what we saw was that firms did more work. And so for example, that $2.5 million that I mentioned in the beta program of AI paralegal work that was done, billable work, that wasn't done instead of human paralegal work. That was done in addition to human paralegal work. So the teams on the ground still did the hours they would have always done, and then that work was additional billable work they wouldn't have otherwise done. And that starts to reveal why the dynamics work this way. And so then you think, okay, well, but where did all that extra work come from? And in the context of family law, in which we were doing the beta, a lot of these firms actually had more work than they could handle. Some of them had stopped advertising. They had a backlog of work they hadn't started yet. And so they simply just cut into that. And so the additional revenue came from that. And so that's where the early revenue came from. But it's not hard to imagine that as a result of using AI to do this, not only are the firms making more money, but the individual clients paying less.
Yeah.
And that's another really counterintuitive thing where you think, well, hold on, they can't both be true. Like either we charge more or the client pays less. It can't both be true, but it can be. And that's because the AI work that was being done was getting paid for. So the firm was making more money. But the individual client was paying less because it was a lower rate than if the human was doing it. And so you need more work for that to be sustainable. And so the question is, where's the work going to come from? And if AI causes the cost of legal services to go down, then more people will actually be able to access them. And that's where the market grows.
Yeah. And in this beta stage, did you find that the reality that legal teams or law firms could do more work with more lawyers was true for particular practice areas, or is this going to be true across any practice area of law?
We were in the context of family law, but I don't think there's anything specific to family law. I think it's true wherever there's latent demand. So if there's latent demand in the market and you can get paid, this is another key part here, if you can get paid for AI work, then that dynamic will work that way.
We're chatting with Andrew Wight, and we'll be back with more right after this. So, Andrew, let's talk about how lawyers and law firms can look to then take advantage of what you're talking about here. And perhaps as a starting point, maybe you've got some thoughts on how lawyers, and certainly the senior lawyers, can be reframing their thinking around what might be possible with AI, instead of thinking that AI is going to replace the work of the juniors or the paralegals, and then we're going to have this leadership vacuum in coming years. How can they pivot their thinking to be able to realize the possibilities and the opportunities that you're talking about?
That's a great question. Let's start with the elephant in the room when it comes to senior leadership in law firms. And it's the thing that a lot of people who are talking about AI aren't talking about. And this doesn't apply just to law. It's as you mentioned before, accounting and other areas like that, wherever you sell time. And so the elephant in the room is that if you sell time for a living and you pay your mortgage and your kids' school fees by selling hours, your goal is not to sell less hours. And so if AI makes things more efficient, how does that really help you? Like that's the elephant in the room, right? And so the key to this is being able to get paid for AI work. And that was probably one of the main innovations that we had to come up with to make AI paralegal work. And so if you can get paid for AI work, then you start to unlock that virtuous circle where you can charge clients less, but you're making more money because your staff are still fully utilized, and then you've got the AI work on top of that as well. And so I think the first key is you need to be able to get paid for AI work. Otherwise, it's not going to work from a business point of view.
Yeah. Do you think that if law firms and and certainly in-house teams, if they realize this idea that you can get paid for that AI work, and you can still charge less but earn more at the same time, as you mentioned earlier, do you think that realization and then putting that into practice could be a nail in the coffin of the billable hour?
I actually don't think so. And so I actually think we're going to see a hybrid. Okay, so I think it depends on the area of law. Some areas of law are easier than others to do fixed fee billing for. It's notoriously hard in family law to do fixed fee billing. And my prediction is that what we'll see is a hybrid model where your AI work is charged for on a fixed fee basis, but your human work, or much of it, will still be charged on a hourly basis. Okay. Won't be true for all human work, but I think for particularly in family law, that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah. So what are the practical steps that lawyers and team leaders need to be taking right now? Let's say they're listening to this episode and they're on board with this idea that, yes, we can do more work with more lawyers, forget the fears that we've had about AI, this is actually going to be hugely beneficial on multiple fronts. What are the practical steps they need to be taking to live up to this idea?
I think you need to work out how to get paid for AI to start with, because as we've talked about, if you don't have that, then you're not going to be moving forward. And so that's kind of what we're working on with the AI Paralegal product. And so the business model that we had to come up with, which I guess we pioneered, which is one in which you task the AI Paralegal with work. It goes and autonomously does that work, and it records the work or the value for the work that it's done according to your costs agreement. And so it's not obvious how that would work. It's this is hard, and firms have struggled with fixed fee billing for decades. And so the way we cracked that problem was we enable firms to set an hourly rate equivalent. It's not actually an hourly rate, it's an hourly rate equivalent, which provides you with an intuitive way to actually charge for your AI Paralegal and to understand how that sits in terms of how expensive it is compared to other people in your team, and whether it's how that works. But it then translates all the tasks it can do against the hourly rate you set to come up with a set of fixed fees, essentially, for all the work it can do. And then it can, when it does work, it can then charge the client according to their costs agreement and dynamically work out what that should actually cost. And so that's very difficult to do manually. And the way that firms have traditionally done a fixed fee is you'll look at the whole thing and you'll say, we'll be able to do this particular job at this cost. Or if they're a bit more sophisticated, they might break it down into smaller steps, but it's still a lot of work. There's still a lot of guesswork involved, a lot of risk involved. And so if you can actually charge on this basis, you don't really have that risk. The client pays for whatever work is done. Yeah. It lines up with the cost agreement. You don't really have the ethical issues. And as we mentioned, the client pays less and the firm makes more. Yeah.
It sounds like quite a reframing of how lawyers and law firms have thought about AI and other new technologies in recent years. So do you think that there's going to be a bit of trial and error or experimentation required here in order to get to that point where you can do more work with more lawyers?
There's going to be a lot of trial and error. I guess the question is, who's doing it to some degree, right? So from my perspective, we've done a lot of trial and error, and we've failed at a lot of things to get to where we are now. We're currently working with a group of early adopters for the Leap integrated product, and so I suppose they are the guinea pigs at this stage, and they're doing very well because they have access to something that no one else has in the world. But ideally, I mean, if you're going to use a product like AI Paralegal, I guess we've done that for you, and so ideally you can just use the product and it just works.
Sure.
But having said that, each firm has its own dynamics, it has its own value proposition, and so any change like this is going to take some level of experimentation and iteration to get it right. Yeah, undoubtedly.
Yeah. And Andrew, what excites you about the future on this front? I mean, this idea that lawyers and law firms can figure out how to get paid for AI work. They can do more work with more lawyers rather than having to downgrade their workforces. Why is this such an exciting proposition for you?
For me personally, access to justice. That's why I started the company, and I can see a pathway to huge impact, right? Because my vision is that this will be a full spectrum access to justice play, and so you're helping people at the top end of town to get higher quality results. The firms are more profitable. You're helping the missing middle because the cost of legal services is going down. More people are getting services. And then you're helping people at the bottom end of the spectrum as well, because you can actually give paralegal work away pro bono to community legal centres, for example. And so you can make a massive impact because you're not just giving them, you're not throwing licenses at them, you're actually doing work for them. And so we have a couple of organisations that we're working with in our beta at the moment. One of them supports victims of domestic violence in particularly complex and violent situations. We have another who supports rural and remote Indigenous communities. We provide all the work pro bono to them. I would love to do that at a much bigger scale.
Yeah. And Andrew, for those who want to learn more about AI Paralegal, how can they find out more? How can they get in touch?
I'm doing a webinar on the 18th of February. So you can go to Leap Family Law and you'll be able to register for that webinar there.
Cool. Andrew Wight, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And thank you to the listener for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give us a rating and review on whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, as it'll help other lawyers discover and enjoy this show. And if you've got ideas for other episodes we can run, please get in touch at editor@lawyersweekly.com.au. You can also reach us on social media. See you again next time.